Great. So I'm so excited to be here with Allison and get into talking about Southern Oregon queer and trans history, which is also to say how we've gotten to where we are and where we're going from here. And this conversation in some ways started, we met at a Three Rivers school board meeting, and then again ran into each other in the parking lot at Cartwright's. And so I'm really excited to like pick up that conversation. And this is the second one of these LGBTQIA2 Spirit plus history events, and we hope to do more in the future. So before we go farther, I want to acknowledge that while we are in digital space, we're also in places and on land, which is Indigenous land. And I'm joining from North Carolina right now. I'm on Lumbee land in Wilmington. But our work is centered in the area that has come to be called Southern Oregon, which is the ancestral homeland of the Takelma and Shasta and Modoc and Cow Creek, Umpqua, Dakupatede, and several other tribes of Indigenous people who've lived here since time immemorial. And these tribes have made their home along the Rogue River and had sophisticated methods of stewardship and stewarding the waters and lands that they have perfected as communities over thousands of years, and unique ways of understanding and honoring gender diversity and roles and names for people that we might now call transgender or two-spirit. So over 150 years ago, or only 150 years ago, between 1851 and 1856, many, though not all, of these Indigenous peoples suffered enormous loss and harm due to the conflicts and forced removal by early settlers in this area. And at the end of the Rogue River Wars, these tribes and many others were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands and forced to migrate to the Siletz Reservation and Grand Ronde. And now those are the living descendants of the Takelma, Cow Creek, Dakupatede, and the Lower Umpqua, Lutgawa, and Shasta. And I share this, because it is Native American History Month, but also because I feel, and with the Listening Project, we feel it's important to understand the longstanding history that's brought settlers to this area and do our part to repair these relationships. So I want to say thank you. I drew some of that language from the work of Native Women Share. And actually tomorrow, RCC is hosting a conversation about the Rogue River Trail of Tears that I hope you will also check out to learn more about local history and ways to honor and revitalize the practices of Indigenous people. And I can drop that link in the chat. So with that, I'm really grateful to introduce Allison Cleveland. I'll read her bio and we can get into our conversation. Allison Elise Cleveland was part of a group of queer and trans folks who formed Chrysalis, a Southern Oregon-based support group for gender diverse folks, which ran successfully for 25 years. In 2000, Allison and others formed the Southern Oregon Gender Center, which provided needed services for folks in gender transition in Southern Oregon. In 2012, that became known as the Gender Center, Inc., and evolved into a multi-state resource for LGBTQI survivors of intimate partner and sexual violence. And then in 2012, this became known as the Oregon Anti-Violence Project and joined the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs, providing training and supportive services for survivors of intimate partner violence and sexual abuse nationally and at times internationally. The focus population was LGBTQIA survivors of bias and hate crimes and intimate violence. Allison did community-based social work as a trainer, consultant, Oregon certified IPVSA advocate, and she was the founding director of the Oregon Anti-Violence Project until her retirement, although I'm not sure you're totally retired, in 2020. Allison also became, after the Pulse nightclub shooting in 2016, an active shooter, violent intruder instructor until her retirement. She's also a certified mediator. She's served on the boards of the Oregon Sexual Assault Task Force, for 18 years, the Oregon Department of Justice Crime Victims Survivors Service Division's Advisory Committee for 17 years, the Equity Foundation Board of Directors, the Social Justice Alliance Board of Directors, and the Rural Organizing Project Board of Directors. She is also a founding member of the Association of Queer University Women and Gender Positive Systems Advocacy Committee. In addition, Allison was the 2012 recipient of the Oregon Department of Justice Crime Victims Service Division Crime Victims Rights Week Award, that's a mouthful, in recognition of your advocacy for marginalized communities, your collaborative approach to working with diverse voices to end domestic and sexual violence, and commitment to advancing gender and sexual minority rights. In 2017, Allison received the MH Leadership Award for her work with LGBTQIA survivors of IPVSA, which is intimate partner violence and sexual assault, from the Oregon Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. Allison's education was in social psychology with some postgrad work in applied psychology, and she retired on January 21st, and her personal time now includes chess, photography, and biking. So I want to, and you are in Southern Oregon. So I want to ask Allison to maybe start by asking you to share a bit about where you grew up and what brought you to Southern Oregon and some of your important influences in your upbringing.
Wow, thank you for all that, Elliot. When you hear that read off, it's just, oh my God, no wonder I'm tired. I grew up in Vermont, went to school in Vermont for, I don't know, about 20 years, including college. In 1968, I moved out to the West Coast and worked my way up into Oregon around 1990. I came into the Tacoma area as a tree planter at the tree planter ball at the Dome School in 1982. And after I saw that place, I thought, well, gosh, if it doesn't work out in California, I will move up here.
Can you say a bit about what Tacoma was like at that time, or yeah, were you part of the hippie community? Yeah, what drew you there?
Not too much a part of the LGBT community. Where I was living in just across the border in Siskiyou County, there weren't any resources, and it wasn't maybe the safest space to be out. So I spent a lot of time in Ashland. People that from my era might remember Cook's Tavern down by Lithia Park. We used to go there for many events. I met many wonderful people, and I also played chess there.
Cool, I love that. And so where does the Southern Oregon Gender Center come in to your story? Because I know you've lived kind of all over Jackson and Josephine counties over the years.
We did. I moved into Cape Junction, Illinois Valley area, lived in Tacoma and in Selma. And in 1995, we were looking for a support group for a group of us that were feeling pretty gender diverse, and we needed some resources. We needed some community. So we formed, there were 7 of us that formed Chrysalis. And Chrysalis was the longest running, continuously supported support group in Oregon for 25 years. In 2020, because of COVID and because the moderator for that group, Vicky, who I hope joins us, was busy with other family matters, and she lives in another county and did not want to drive over because of COVID. And I didn't want to take it on because of COVID. We did think about moving it strictly to an online group, but we thought that there would be other opportunities for that for folks in Southern Oregon. So we closed it down. We are actually talking about having a family reunion for the 7 of us that started that. One of the things that Chrysalis did during the holiday season is that we would go to one of the better restaurants in Jackson County in Ashland and have our holiday party there. So there's been some talk about doing that, probably not this year, but perhaps by next year we can locate all the folks that have drifted off into their lives and bring them together and have a time for that. We realized around 1998, 99 that a support group wasn't everything that was needed down here. Our resources for transsexual people was very, very scarce. We had to kind of create all our resources as we went. Some of the folks were going to Portland for resources, and they were seeing whatever therapist that they needed to see for a gateway to medical and surgical responses for gender affirming care. And there was a group of us that decided that we were not going to travel to Portland to do this. We were going to form our own group down here, and we did so. And so we formed the Southern Oregon Gender Center just to provide whatever needed services and support that we could for people in transition. We were a firefighter, a law enforcement officer, a wildlife biologist. One worked on the railroad, the other was a sawmill at one of the local sawmills. And so this was our background as we started pulling together these resources. And so we had to educate ourselves before we could educate other people. And that is what we did. So one of the things that came up around 2000, 2001 is I was being contacted about sexual abuse of queer identified and trans identified people, and what could we do to help support them? Well, there again, we didn't have the background to do this, so we went and took the trainings that we needed to take to become advocates, and we built our own resource network, which went for many years before it just naturally phased out as other resources became available. Myself, I worked with an Attorney General Sexual Assault Task Force in Legislative and Public Policy Committee, Education Committee, and Medical Response Committee before I committed to taking the training that I needed to take to write a program designed particularly for trans survivors of sexual abuse and physical abuse. And so with the support of one of my colleagues at the task force in 2009, we wrote that program, and we have marketed that program to many organizations in many states. So we now have a program that is specific for trans people.
Wow, what incredible work, and thank you. And I have to say, like, I mean, as you know, but I live in the Illinois Valley. I've been based in the Illinois Valley. I moved there in 2015, and I thought that I was the only trans person there, or that had ever been there, or whatever, which is totally untrue. But it's taken a long time to, yeah, to realize that too. So I'm so curious to ask, like, what was it like for you and the other folks who started that support group? Like, what was it like being transgender, gender nonconforming in Josephine County in 1995? Yeah, and how do you feel like things have changed, or how do you feel like they've changed?
Things have changed. And how was it back then? Back then, many of us were not out. We had professions that maybe weren't very forgiving to diversity at that time. And so we were really maintaining dual lives. And that wasn't the best thing for us. Being your open and authentic self, it is really where people should be. And so it was challenging. One of the better things that actually happened to me, which was not a good thing at its time, was being outed in Southern Oregon. So once I had been outed, then basically there was nothing left to lose. So I could go forward, be myself, where and whenever I needed to be that person. And that really opened up a life that had been deeply restricted all my youth.
Yeah, I'm thinking, like, right now we're in this, I mean, locally and nationally, this is a very timely conversation because we're in this intense backlash on trans rights. And I mean, actually, there's a lot of public conversation about transgender people, but it's not, you know, yeah, it's not all positive or educational, or so I guess I'm curious about some of the, if this moment feels familiar, or some of the strategies that have helped you, or that you feel like has helped, yeah, has helped like our communities in the past, like move through some of the hate and transphobia.
Now I have about 20 years life experience and 20 years professional experience working on these issues. Title VII, Title IX, Title II of the 1964 Civil Rights Code. We've worked on this in gender equality and gender equity. One of the first people that I worked with was an incredible young woman from Duke University in North Carolina. And she was an incredible instructor on how we could use Title VII and Title IX in our work within the transgender community and the queer community at large. So now we do have those skills to to pass on to others as these issues are coming up again and again throughout Oregon. Especially, we're seeing a lot of it in affecting the school board, and one of the more vulnerable populations that is out there today is our young children in schools that are just trying to find out their lives.
Yeah, one of the things I also wanted to ask you is like, what messages do you have for young transgender people growing up in this area? Like, what would you want them to know? Yeah.
That's always been a hard one for me to answer. You know, what I want to share. You know, be your authentic self. Always be true to yourself. Is what I learned. Now there's so many resources out there and available to folks to reach out to some of these organizations for whatever support that you might need, whether it be just a conversation, somebody to just be a witness and a ride along in your life, to be a confidant for you. There's folks out there that can do that.
Yeah, that I can drop in the chat, and folks can find on the Rogue Action Center's website. We've been like pulling resources together, just, you know, putting out there like what are the organizations and resources for LGBTQ people in our area and for queer youth. And I mean, it's interesting you were talking about people going to Portland, because I also feel like even now, I mean, like there's things that don't exist in every community, but because of the internet and, you know, we can access like groups of people who have a shared experience online. But I know that I also am like, I would love to have more queer friends in Cave Junction, or there's also like that local piece that feels really important. Yeah.
The internet has been incredibly an incredible resource for all of us, but it really doesn't fill the need for human contact and human support. Just having a support group where you can have the most casual conversation with friends is where people are there for you and witnessing what you're going through, and you're there to share that with them. That is probably one of the best things that can happen.
I'm so curious. I wonder if you have any like snapshots in your mind or of like memories from Chrysalis of, yeah, just like great moments or memories that you could share with us.
Chrysalis was and has been just a really wonderful support group. For those of us that graduated out of there many years ago, we still go back for various social events with one another. One of the things that we had an issue with it when we formed the support group is, where are we going to do this? Because many of us were not out, and we needed to preserve our identities and our professional lives. So we wound up in a motel room in Medford. We had two adjoining rooms that we would meet in, which wasn't the most ideal space, but it worked perfectly for us. Right next door to the motel was a restaurant. And in that restaurant, we would go over there and some of us were very dressed for the occasion, and have our meal there. And when we first started showing up there, we were noticing that all the people were coming out of the kitchen and the back room and pouring water for us and being part of the event. So we were quite the attraction for them. And so it was quite a laugh for us to be part of that sideshow for these folks. Later on, as things progressed, we went on and went out to many other places. We went out to dances as groups, and we had a good time being there for one another and supporting one another. We're fortunate to have Allison Elise Center down there in Ashland, and we met there for a couple of years in Ashland at the Allison Elise Center, which was an LGBTQIA2S center located in Ashland. It was named after two lesbian women that were prominent in that area. And it was supported by Harry and David, one of the local entrepreneurs there, a couple of gay men that were very kind and very generous with the Allison Center, and also with the Chrysalis, with the different donations to us at different times. And also we, for those of us that are a little bit more political than the others, we had the Queer Caucus. The Queer Caucus had been formed many years before I got there, I think in the 70s in Ashland area. And it was a political group started by a couple of very bright men from the area. And so through the Queer Caucus, we kind of honed our skills a little bit about taking on some of the issues that were coming up. The marriage issue was being brought up at that time. It didn't pass that time. It was many years later before that passed. And I was fortunate enough to get to work on that one. And also the Oregon Equality Act in 2006 and 2007, working on that there. But the groundwork that led up to that was actually happening through the Queer Caucus in the Ashland area, and also through the Rural Organizing Project up in Columbia County, which I was on the board of directors for. And Marcy Westerling was probably one of the most incredible organizers that I've got to work with. Very sadly, she was taken from us before all our work was done. So we did get to work with them on Measure 36 at that time, and which was defeated. And then later on, when it came back around again, we worked on that measure, and that measure was successful.
What is Measure 36?
Measure 36, in fact, I just found the posters from that campaign as I was cleaning it up yesterday. Measure 36 was a quest to have equal rights for marriage for LGBTIQ people here in Oregon. And it was heavily funded by opposition from that, and it failed by a narrow margin. Check Wikipedia for more details on that there.
That sounds amazing. Is the Queer Caucus, does that still exist, or I haven't heard of that? Did it end or evolve into something else, or?
Well, actually, it did involve it in something else. And the Queer Caucus, the political organization, as far as I know, dissolved in Jackson County and Ashland area. We brought up the Queer Caucus, and we were using that along with a Gender Positive Systems Advocacy Committee, which is GIPSAC, a terrible acronym. But we were doing that around domestic and sexual violence up in the Portland metro area. And the Queer Caucus still exists as part of the Oregon Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. And that's how queer advocates across Oregon are breaking isolation and communicating with themselves on the best ways to serve queer survivors of domestic and sexual violence. At the Gender Center, when we started broadening out and working with survivors of domestic and 2004, we, excuse me, we formed what was called the peer-to-peer, queer-to-queer initiative within. And what we did is we trained folks to become advocates around domestic and sexual violence. And we wanted it to be very much queer-led, away from mainstream nonprofits, and to be there for survivors of domestic and sexual violence. Many of the advocates that we had over the years were also EMTs, nurses, attorneys, college students, and they all worked by donating their time to this project. Nobody ever made any money at the Gender Center. It was a great place to lose money and do incredible work. Exactly as we planned.
And so how were people paired up, or what was that peer-to-peer connection?
Well, we didn't have the technology that we have today, where we could get together on Zoom, we get together on Facebook, some of that. So we were doing a lot of driving around and connecting with people. We would have our meetings in different counties, different cities throughout Oregon, so that somebody was always hosting, and it was never really the same person. We hosted in rotation, and we conducted our meetings that way. And whenever we could, when we're in different counties, in different cities or towns, because we are very much rural advocates, is we would try to find an organization or somebody to be a speaker at one of our events. So every time that we met for what we so-called the staff meeting, we were having speakers come in and sharing with us what was going on in our community, and maybe finding ways that we could network or coalesce with them to do our work and help them achieve theirs. Money, funding. We survive by donors, and what money that we donated ourselves to it. we received exactly $4,000 in grant funds in the 20 years that we were doing what we were doing. So
wow. Was the money kind of not available, or was that also your value system, or yeah?
We looked at grant funding, and I myself were on different grants committees working with Equity Foundation, Pride Foundation, Collins Foundation, and also through the Oregon Department of Justice Crime Victim Survivor Services Division, where all the monies that went out to domestic and sexual violence organizations, be they tribal or municipal or rural, all came through our funding stream. We have 7 funding streams that we put together. And so money was there. We could have tapped into that. With that money also came with rules and reportability. And one of the things that we didn't want to do is to be particularly that out or share too much information with folks that we weren't sure how that information was going to be used. And so we stayed pretty independent. We stayed sustainable and in the work that we did. We're very grateful for the amount of donors that gave to us over the years. Some of the donors were with us for 12 years. So they appreciated what we could do. We appreciated their support in doing what we were doing.
That's amazing. Yeah. And just as somebody kind of learning about, accessing funding, working in, whatever, labor equity, all these things. And so to hear you say that it was sustainable, I think is an immense feat too. Yeah. I have, oh, go ahead.
In our modeling for our organization, it was always about consent. So we needed, if we had something proposed, and it went around to each and one of the person, and we looked for consent on that. If we did not get consent, we just didn't do it. It was very consent-driven organization, and the folks that were donating their time weren't asking for much more than the opportunity to help out. It was very good. Not a very capitalistic venture, to be sure, but that was okay too. We did the work that we needed to do, and we preserved our values.
I have some more questions, but I also want to open it up. I know there's some folks here who are working in, with a lot of the same kind of themes of your work. And yeah, so I'm curious if anyone wants to unmute and ask a question, or if you want to drop a question in the chat, if there's any questions for Allison.
Hi. So I currently work as a tri-poly victimization case manager and advocate. So I'm like certified and everything in California, but I recently moved to Oregon, and the certifications and the process and everything to continue on that track seem very different. And it sounds like you have done it all. So I was actually curious how I can kind of get on the same path.
That's a good question. Thanks for bringing that part of it up. Oregon Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence has been doing the certification for advocacy around DVSA, domestic violence, sexual assault, sexual abuse. And so connecting with one of the directors up there, Vanessa Timmons is the executive director. Since 2005. I would imagine if she has time, she would enjoy having a conversation with you to get you certified and plugged into other organizations if that's where you wanted to go, or help you start your own clinic or practice.
Awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate all the work you've done. And I hope to kind of just like carry that on. Like maybe I'll be where you are one day. So thank you.
That's good to hear that that you're interested in taking that on. Working with survivors is not an easy task, but it's turned out to be some of the most rewarding work that I have done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll keep asking questions, but I want to just welcome if you want to drop a question in the chat or unmute and speak up, that's also really welcome. Allison, I'm curious to ask, I feel like I don't know very much about the field of like domestic violence, sexual assault work and prevention and survivor support. And I'm curious like why you feel like that work is really important. Like you've dedicated a lot of your life to like, it seems like doing work to really support survivors. And yeah, I wondered if you would just speak a little about why you feel that work in queer community is really important.
It's hard to explain how I got totally drawn into this. One of the things I can say without saying too much is when I was at Southern Oregon University, one of the women that I was working with through PFLAG and Grants Pass asked me to come on the board of directors for a startup rural DVSA organization. And I told her no, I wasn't interested. I was getting ready to possibly open up my own private practice, but thanks for the offer anyways. About 6 months later, during the Boatneck Parade, where we were marching as PFLAG down the 6th Street and Grants Pass, she asked me again, see, by the way, we'd really like for you to come over and be part of the administration of this new organization so we can get this up and running and start providing services here in rural Oregon. And again, I said, no, I don't think so. I don't think that's really what I need to be doing. And so it was a couple months later at another meeting, and she asked me again, says, would you please come over and be part of the board of directors and help us start working on grant funding and in putting the 501c3 together that we need to do and so forth. And I said, yes, I'd be glad to do that. And so we went there and we started the organization and working as on the board of directors and taken training for advocacy around domestic and sexual violence. And then I'm working with some community partners to build a safe house. And one of the things I was stunned to realize was one of the wise women of the community that was very helpful in helping organize this said, by the way, we probably won't be allowing any lesbian women into this organization.
Whoa.
I was stunned. I was stunned. And the woman standing next to me, she also was quite stunned. And so that's when we decided that, well, we'll just take an alternate path here and we'll find places for folks that need sheltering should trauma happen in their lives. And we started our peer-to-peer, queer-to-queer project. That was when that first started. The second place that I worked in Southern Oregon was as night manager for a shelter here. And also I worked as interim shelter manager for that organization while I was taking classes at SOU and still maintaining another part-time job. And I get to talking with some of the survivors that were in that shelter at night. We'd be sitting there having tea together or, working on a plan for them to move on with their lives. And I was very affected by the stories that they were telling me of what was happening in their lives. And I definitely wanted to be helpful to these women in the shelter and help them move on. And I also wanted it for the larger LGBTQIA2S community throughout Oregon. And so domestic and sexual violence in the LGBTQIA2S community is roughly parallel to what happens in the dominant community. And yet there was not really a lot of resources, much the same way for transsexual people. We found there wasn't many resources for us. So here we were being kind of a niche organization, trying to fill that gap at the best that we could. And so we were advocating for folks. We were making hospital visits with survivors of abuse. We were being part of medical and forensic exams for sexual survivors. And increasingly for me, because possibly I might have been one of the only sexual people out there working on this, I was spending more time with trans survivors of sexual abuse, physical abuse, intimate partner abuse, ritual abuse, and not being very prepared for being the person that I needed to be in working with them. So we were taking more classes, we were writing classes, because in many cases, there wasn't anything out there. when it came to medical and forensic exams for transsexual survivors of sexual abuse, there was nothing out there. So we wrote it. 2009, Dr. Smith and I wrote that. We took it to Portland State. We took it to the Sexual Assault Task Force. We asked our peers within it to review what we had wrote and make recommendations for any changes that we might want to make so that we would be accurate with what we were doing. We went through this process, and by April of 2010, we were out and about presenting this to different organizations. Washington Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence was one of the organizations. WICSAP, Washington Sexual Assault Programs. We were there with that. I was in California with it. We were making online presentations through Prevent Connect, and we became involved with a International Association of Forensic Nurses. And so finally, we had a program to offer. And so we were training all of our volunteer advocates on how to be an advocate, an ally, a supporter for people that were experiencing trauma in their life.
Wow, what incredible work. I guess I'm also curious to ask, I don't know that this is like a fair question, but I'm curious about your thoughts. I'm thinking, like, in the survey that we did last year, like the rates of people reporting being given misinformation by medical providers is super high in Southern Oregon, you know, and for trans and gender nonconforming people, it's even higher. And I guess I just wonder about your thoughts, like, why is that? And, you know, are people getting trained, but it's not the right training? Are people not getting trained? Like, why is healthcare here so bad for trans people?
That is getting better, but the bigger it is, the slower it moves. You know, change is glacial in nature. Once it moves through, it changes the landscape forever. But oh my gosh, waiting for it to come is hard for the average activist and agitator. Medical schools for the long time were not training their doctors in care for trans people. I think now that is more so. I'm not really quite sure because I've actually not been studying this for the last years. I'm working more on other anti-violence projects, but counseling, I think myself and the wonderful people I worked with, I couldn't have done anything without the people around me. Incredible, dedicated, positive people that brought different skill sets to that, filled in with their skill sets for things that others did not have, and that's made it work. It's all contributions. So I think I did around 150 trainings around advocacy for different organizations. Some of that I get paid in chocolate, which is as good as Bitcoin as far as I'm concerned. Yes, I will work for chocolate or a cup of coffee. We just donated what we could to get that information out. Some of the advocates that we had were incredible instructors, and they brought some wonderful skill sets to the work that we did. And once again, it was just amazing and a very beautiful thing for that. Recently, 8 of us got together in Newport, Oregon in July, and celebrated the fact that we did the work that we did. And now we're all moved on and doing other work. So yeah, that was great. I ramble.
I'm so grateful for these like stories in this history. And I mean, I think it's still like the way that you know, I and many other queer people in Southern Oregon could have the sense that like there's nothing here, or there's no one here, or I'm the only one. And then like learning about the, you know, decades of really amazing work in community building that's happened here, it's like such a relief. Like it feels so healing for me, you know. So I will totally listen to you, Graham. I guess maybe I've asked you this kind of question already, but I'm curious about your thoughts, like for people, for me or other, you know, queer and trans people who are wanting to build a stronger sense of LGBTQ community, like a queer political movement in Southern Oregon. Like, what do you feel like we should know, or, you know, and what do we need to know in order to try to do it well? Yeah.
As I listened into various meetings around Southern Oregon, I feel that folks are really doing the work. They're coming together and networking and putting on the programs and facing some of the issues head on. I don't know if I've got, you know, any sage advice for these younger organizers. They're doing incredible work.
Well, that is very sweet to hear. And I have to kind of say, like, for folks who don't know, that tomorrow the students in Grants Pass School District are walking out of school in protest of the school board's decision to rehire Medard and Damiano. And there's also a community rally at 5 p.m. at the district office. And that's not being shared publicly on social media, but I can drop both of the graphics for those two things. And so it's a really exciting moment. You know, I feel like I've experienced a lot of challenge in living in Josephine County as a trans person. I've seen my friends have really hard experiences. And so this moment that that these like kids are walking out of school in this way and what's happening feels pretty exciting to me. Yeah.
I will be there to support them.
Yes. Maybe I'll just open it up again. Is there anyone who's participating who has like a question or comment for Allison? Or Allison, any questions that you have for us? Oh, Ollie's got one. Go for it.
I have a question. Sorry, my hair is bonkers. I'm like trying to study. So just so great to hear. Thank you. Yeah, just thank you all for this. This is wonderful. I've done a lot of organizing with Elliot, and now I'm like in grad school and in Corvallis and just in a very different situation, although still like talking about rural Southern Oregon every day. Like I'm the queer Southern Oregon person now, but in my program. But anyway, just building off of that question, Elliot, what are some things that like worked really well, Allison, in your organizing in Southern Oregon? Like, what are some things that you were like, yes, I would retain that, like strengths of the people that you were working with, or things that you, yeah, just things that worked well, or that you would do again.
Wow, I would do it all again. Thank you for that, and good luck in Corvallis at OSU, one of my favorite places up there. Stick to your values, and whatever program that you're building, you know, does it meet the sustainability question? If we build it, will it last? And is there a way to take care of it? One of the reasons we didn't want to do grants, because as often we can get a grant that'll run 1, 2, 3 years in a row. But what happens to that person that we hire if that grant runs out? So if nobody's getting paid, and are people there because they have some time to donate to the work that we're doing, we were able to stay sustainable. We were the little small cork floating in a very big body of water, and you know, we lasted 20 years until finally I decided to pretty much retire. So sustainability, stay with your values. If grant supported programs are the way to go, look for a really great grant writer, and only accept grant money programs for from programs that share your values.
I hope you see in the chat Ollie's hearts, and they said such good advice. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I am curious to ask you. So I know this is Transgender Week of Awareness, and Trans Day of Remembrance is on the 20th. I think.
Yes.
It's coming up. Yeah. I don't know how long that celebration has been around, and I guess I'm just curious about what it means to you, or how you've participated in or marked this week or that day.
When we were in Southern Oregon, we weren't doing a lot around Trans Awareness Week, or TDOR, Trans Day of Remembrance. In 2004, I partnered up with Lane Gender Task Force in Eugene, and the City of Eugene Equity and Human Rights and Neighborhood Involvement program up there. Fabulous program. And we started doing TDOR and Trans Awareness Week up there. So for our Trans Awareness Week, a lot of it was social. We would arrange to have a dance someplace, or we would have performers. We did various programs like That Takes Ovaries. If you've were aware of that program, we did that just for fun. And
Oh my gosh, I don't know about that. Please say more.
okay, I'll come back to that. Thank you. But doing Trans Awareness Week, and we did a lot of educational programs, you know, helping people with a Trans 101, pronouns, and how to address various questions or concerns that they might have. And for the counselors that we worked with at the U of O Department of Counseling and Social Work, Portland State University, Lane County Mental Health Organization, we trained counselors on working with I keep wanting to say survivors, but trans individuals on that. TDOR, one of the things that we did as the Gender Center was we contacted Ted Kulongoski, President, and John Kitzhaber, or President, excuse me, when he was governor of Oregon. He never made president. And John Kitzhaber when he was governor, and Kate Brown as governor. And each year we asked for a proclamation from them on Trans Day of Remembrance. So in my files to be passed on to somebody at some point are all those proclamations that we did and taken TDOR Trans Awareness Week up to the state level and bringing them in as partners on the work that we were doing. One of the funds that we did get through Equity Foundation, we got $500 to bring in a speaker for Trans Awareness Week, and that worked out quite fabulous. We had donations from different eateries around town for the food that we did. So whatever event that we had, there were some sort of snacks out there, whether it was pretzels, popcorn, and M&Ms, or if we actually were able to serve a community-sized dish to people there. Always feed the people. Sometimes it was pizza. Working with Kitty Piercy, she was had become the mayor of Eugene, and she was instrumental in the work that we were doing around Trans Awareness Week and TDOR. And the first TDOR that we had was in the atrium in Eugene. If you're aware of that, it's a city-owned office building downtown by the library. And there were 6 of us there. 3 of us were presenters. The other 2 was Kitty Piercy and her husband, David. And we had a trans person that came up that needed support. So that was what the first TDOR looked like. The next year, we had 100 people at our events throughout the week. 2 years after that, I'm guessing that by then it was probably double over events over 4 and 5 days. So we built it up and passed it on. There's a wonderful organization up there called Transponder, and they're doing some incredibly wonderful work within the city. And TDOR Trans Awareness Week is just ingrained into the culture in Eugene.
Cool, that is so neat to hear about. And can you imagine like Trans Week of Awareness or Trans Day of Remembrance event in Grants Pass or Williams? Or yeah, what do you think that would look like?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that would feel like. In Grants Pass, one of the things that we did is we did the Laramie project. And I actually been thinking maybe it's time that we did that once again. That might be a good event to bring in there. And it was an organization that was part of Grants Pass queer culture for a while, and it was called Connect the Dots. And it dissolved. People moved on from that. But the two organizers for that organization were very much stage and dance savvy. And they said, oh, let's do the Laramie Project here in Grants Pass. I'm sure the people will love it. And we will we'll bring Judy Shepard in as a speaker. Judy Shepard is Matthew Shepard's mother, and she's now the president of the Matthew Shepard Foundation. And so that was the first time that I heard. I had the privilege of being an angel in that presentation. I grabbed it because I figured, well, this is probably the only chance, you know. And so we did that, and I think that might be fun to do again. Yeah, I think it's good for Grants Pass to get a little exposure.
Yeah. What year was that happened?
Oh gosh, that would have to be around 2001, something like that. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's kind of when it was. I still have the playbills from that, and I'm in contact with one of the organizers, and he now lives in Eugene, and I'm thinking about asking him, you know, what do you think about coming back to Grants Pass and helping put that back on again? Where would how would we do it? That's another story.
Well, I know there's a lot of, I mean, I'm a theater person. I was looking to see somebody who was here earlier is also on the part of Barnstormers. And anyway, yeah, I think that's a very interesting idea. That kind of reminds me, I guess, one other question I wanted to ask is, you know, when we did this survey last year, or well, I'll back up even a little more, which is to say, like I came to Southern Oregon through the Radical Fairy Sanctuary and through like queer community. And so I've generally had a sense of feeling connected to a lot of queer people in the time that I've lived here. And then one of the things that came through in the survey was just like, oh, there's a lot of very different experiences happening. Yeah, there's a lot of different sub communities and people, it's hard to sort of find each other, and there's a lot of like unmet needs in our area, as well as, you know, a lot of reasons that people choose to live here. And I guess I wondered, like, if you know, I think I've spent some time feeling overwhelmed by just all the different needs and sort of like, how do we organize to, you know, make it better for each other and so that like people can thrive here. And I guess, yeah, I'm curious to ask, like, if you could, you know, wiggle your nose and change one thing, like what would be at the top of your list to make different in our area?
Boy, that's another difficult question to answer. What we found is we couldn't do it all. And I like to think of the queer, transgender, diverse community as more of a confederation, because there's all these factions operating under the same oppressive umbrella. And we're communities on the margin, and that's what probably connects us together. So we found that we can only do so much with what we had. And so we remained as a niche organization to do the work that we did. And whenever we could, we supported other organizations with what we had learned and networked with them. We pretty much stayed on our track with our anti-violence work.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I feel like I'm learning a lot this year about, there's like all the ideas, and then there's like, well, what do you actually have the capacity to do and do well? And which is very different than all the things that I can think of or identify that need to happen or something. So
What was it? Once again, I go back to sustainability. We didn't want to start a program for survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence and not have it be there tomorrow or when people needed us. And so we tried not to expand our program beyond our capacity. We kept it very small. We were available to people that needed us. We worked not only in Oregon, but we were part of a national coalition of anti-violence programs. So we were sharing ideas and services with, I think, 40 other cities and states and 55 programs at our peak. And that national coalition is still there. We are still kind of part of it, but we're not an active part of it any longer. I'm retired.
and is somebody else stepping in to continue the Oregon Anti-Violence Project, or is it?
Not that I know of. We were pretty much a standalone organization, and I guess it is only to exist why we were there to do the work. Our advocates are now working in different states, different professions, but most of them are still doing the same work, but now with other organizations. I would love to see another standalone organization that would advocate for survivors of violence.
Yeah, may it be so. Before we close, we're like, I guess I want to ask about, chess, photography, and biking. So we already talked a little bit about biking. Are you like, I'd love to ask more about your photography work, if there's anywhere I can see your photographs.
Well, I don't have much put up as far as photography. As far as chess, one of the things that I'm trying to organize is a chess club here in Southern Oregon, or in the Williams Ranch, Mass area. I've talked to the Josephine County Library system, and they're mildly interested in hosting us if we can put something together. But once again, I don't want to start a program that doesn't look like it's going to have some sustainability and be there for both the adult population and the youngers. I'd like to see some of the younger folks get involved in chess if that is their wish. Biking, now that I'm retired, I can go out and ride my bike. I don't have to put it off.
And you're more a mountain biker, is that right?
That is correct, yeah. I have 2 bikes at the present. I'm about to convert one of them into an electric bike for more commuting.
Oh, very cool. Well, I hope that next time I'm in Williams, I'll see you whizzing around.
Okay.
Anybody else have anything you want to say or ask? Or Allison, do you have anything else you want to share before we close?
I don't. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I want to thank you so much. I feel so